Hello, YouTube. The Soviet nuclear submarine fleet was the most powerful in the world. At least that's the opinion of some people. The giant nuclear submarine's Murena, meaning Murray eel, was 155 meters long. Delfin, dolphin, 167 meters long. And Akula, shark, 172 meters. And they inspired fear in NATO countries. For months, they silently plowed the oceans under the water in order to suddenly, if necessary, deliver a decisive blow to the enemy with missiles, with nuclear warheads. Those Akula subs, they were especially feared in the West. Each such submarine was armed with 20 R-39 missiles capable of covering a distance of 8.3 thousand kilometers. The warhead of one R-39 was divided into 10 warheads of 100 kilotons each. One such shark could wipe out all life from the half of the United States territory. 20 missiles, 20 megatons of TNT equivalent, which is twice as much as the power of all the detonated bombs during World War II, 10 megatons combined. But in the USSR, they were able to build not only gigantic submarines, but also the ultra-small ones, which were carefully classified until 1991. They were intended for the delivery of divers, mining ships, patrolling ports, harbors, and for raids into the enemy territory. The most famous of the Soviet ultra-small submarines are the Sirena, which was 11 meters in length, and Triton 2, 9.5 meters. I've made videos about the Triton or Triton subs. These mini subs, ultra-small subs, were created in the 1960s and 1970s. But long before them, in the mid-1930s, the first super small submarine Pygmy, or Pygmy in English, was built in the USSR. And it was considered a breakthrough at the time. Who designed it? Vladimir Ivanovich Bekauri. Engineer Bekauri, a nobleman from Georgia, did not know the meaning of the word impossible. Everything that the inventor undertook, he always succeeded. In 1920, he made an indelible impression even on Soviet dictator Lenin with a project to install an electric alarm system for steel safes, which he came up with himself, this Georgian engineer. Well, in 1921, on behalf of Vladimir Lenin, the restless Bekauri created a special technical bureau for military inventions, OST Bureau. It had 6 departments. All of them were engaged in the invention of military equipment and new types of weapons, mainly based on radio control. For example, the explosives department created the first Soviet torpedo, which had a speed of 45 knots. The same department designed radio control Akula-1 torpedoes, self-propelled mines, long-range radio fuses, widely used during the Second World War. Most of Vladimir Ivanovich Bekauri's projects and works are still carefully classified in Russia. USSR is gone, but still classified in modern Russia. In 1934, the diving department designed the ultra-small submarine APSS. That's abbreviation for air-powered or aerial-powered self-propelled projectile. It was controlled by radio from an airplane or ship and was a torpedo weighing 8.5 tons. A total of 2 such apparatuses were built, but they turned out to be far from ideal, and it was decided to create a submarine, an air-pod boat based on the APSS, but with a crew of 4 people. On behalf of Bekauri, a group of talented engineers led by Fyodor Viktorovich Shukin took over the project. In August 1935, an experimental model of the submarine was manufactured at the Sudamech plant in Leningrad. Its displacement was 18.5 tons, length 16 meters. It was 2.7 meters wide. Its maximum speed was underwater, 5 knots. Diving depth was 30 meters. Autonomy was 3 days, and armament was a pair of 457 millimeter torpedoes. Immediately, the submarine, which was given the name Pygmy, made several trips to the Gulf of Finland. In November of the same year, the submarine was delivered by rail to Balaclava for acceptance work. But even before the tests, People's Commissar, meaning Minister, Voroshilov, signed an order for the production of 10 submarines. The tests began in the autumn of 1936 and took place secretly at night in the quarantine bay. The submarine did not pass them. Everything was done for the first time, so there were many disadvantages. For example, the electric motor with the shaft line worked asynchronously, which led to strong vibration. The engine smoked, heated, and rumbled. One of the torpedoes simply sank when fired, etc. All the flaws were uncritical, although, of course, it took time to fix them. Repeated tests were scheduled for November 1937, but Bekauri and Shukin were not given enough time. They were arrested in 1937 and shot, executed in 1938. Vladimir as a German spy, and Fyodor as a saboteur who deliberately made the Pygmy submarine inoperable. The entire bureau was shut down and its projects were recognized as a destructive waste of people's money. 3 finished Pygmy submarines were dismantled on the slipway at the Sudamech plant. The experimental submarine was transported from Sevastopol to a test base in Feodosia, where it was soon forgotten about. There, in November of 1941, the Germans got the Pygmy, and they were amazed to see the abandoned secret submarine. While those Nazis studied it carefully and borrowed quite a lot. They produced their super small submarine Seehund only in 1944, and then they let the Italians work with it, who by that time had created the ultra-small submarine SV, and with its help, successfully sank Soviet ships and submarines. Foreigners were amazed by the successes of Soviet military scientists. After all, before that, Italians believed that their achievements were unique. The fate of the Pygmy submarine is not known for sure. A similar apparatus was discovered in the 1980s by Soviet divers at the depth of 40 to 50 meters off the coast of Feodosia. During the World War II, ultra-small submarines were in service for almost all the leading belligerent states. I already mentioned about fascist Italy. They were also used by the British, Japanese, and Germans. The British used a pair of such X-class boats that attacked the battleship Tirpitz off the coast of Norway and seriously damaged it, detonating 4 mines of 2 tons each. The repair of the ships took 6 months, but the USSR had no ultra-small submarines due to the fault of the overzealous NKVD, or as we know them later, KGB operatives. But Bekauri and Shukin turned out to be innocent, and they were rehabilitated in the late 1950s. But here's another insight into the story. I need to present it here as well. According to some researchers, no one was trashing OST Bureau. It was competently divided into 3 independent branch institutes: NII, Научно-исследовательский институт, or Scientific Research Institute 20, NII 22, and NII 36, which should have been done from the very beginning. It would never occur to anyone to combine the rocket and missile industry with the tank industry, and in OST Bureau, everything was mishmash. Undoubtedly, the design bureau gave good ideas and even technology, the Akula torpedoes are still classified: radio-controlled mines, radar, and so forth. But in fact, the mountain gave birth to a mouse. Due to the crowding of problems, it took more time to allocate funds than to work. And not small funds for a poor country, as the USSR was at the time. In addition, many projects were simply technically impossible with that level of development. But many, such as Korolev, simply did not want to understand this. In general, technically disbanding the Bureau was the right decision. They can't say anything about Bekauri. His investigative file from the KGB case is still classified, and when someone writes something from the alleged investigative protocols or other things, he's lying like a gray gelding, to use a colorful Russian expression. But now, after I heard this criticism and let you hear it, let's find out a few more details from open sources so you can have the full picture and learn a few more things. So more than 50 years ago, a Soviet remote-controlled spacecraft right through the virgin moon dust, transmitting unique panoramic views from the surface of the night star, made news. And today, mankind has come close to the era of drone wars and combat robots. But Bekauri, a star of the first magnitude in the firmament of the 20th century Russian technical thought, was the first to put forward their complex idea, and I'm talking about that vehicle on the moon and the drones and so forth. So he was the first to put up such complex idea and partially implemented it in the utter chaos of the post-revolutionary Russia. Under Bekauri's leadership, 11 new models of military equipment were put into service. 17 samples were submitted for testing, and 20 samples of weapons were under development. Personally, Bekauri made the most important fundamental inventions in the field of naval mines, which were much ahead of the times. The self-propelled automatic mine, priority given from 1924, anchor mine torpedo, priority from 1926, a missile-based mine, priority from 1927. In the mid-1920s, Bekauri proposed the creation of a remote-controlled unmanned tank, which would now be called a cyborg tank. Think about that. In 1926, 1927, Bekauri put forward the idea of creating torpedo mines and missile mines, which were implemented only in the 1980s. Vladimir Bekauri's name was inextricably linked with one of the first designs enterprises, as it's called, OST Bureau, a special technical bureau attached to the Supreme Council of the National Economy of the USSR. Bekauri was the bureau's boss, main inventor, and inspiration. Thanks to him, the leaders of Soviet Russia were able to look into the future and understand that it is beyond robotics. Vladimir Lenin, first Soviet leader, liked the idea of fighting the enemies of the revolution from a distance, repelling attacks with the radio-controlled landmines, and advancing with the help of radio-controlled ships and airplanes. Vladimir Bekauri became famous much earlier than the appearance of the country we know now as the USSR. You see, the counterintelligence service of the Russian Empire took under their observation the railroad technician, young Bekauri, back in 1905. Bekauri himself said that before the revolution, he made bombs for the Stalinist underground in Georgia, but in fact, he lived poorly. The law enforcement agencies of the empire not only noticed the 23-year-old talented inventor, but also took him under their wing. In 1907, Bekauri was moved to St. Petersburg and settled in the prestigious building number 5 on Tavricheskaya Street, in an apartment with a telephone, a big deal for the times. To earn money, the inventor made ingenious safes and finally crafted mechanical toys that delighted the rich. But Bekauri considered invention to be his main job. In 1910, he received the first patent for an invention that automatically marked the date and time on a telegraph tape. In 1914, Bekauri patented an apparatus for recording the downtime of railway wagons, railway cars, I should say. In 1915, he invented a fake periscope on a buoy and a diving mine. By 1916, Bekauri had 16 personal patents for inventions and 46 patents with co-authors. After the Russian Revolution and the communist takeover of the country, Bekauri, he could have been welcomed with open arms in England or the United States, but the Soviet dictator Lenin prevented the brain drain. He ordered several expensive safes from Bekauri for storing documents and gold and offered to cooperate. The first joint brainchild of the Bolsheviks, Russian communists, and scientists, among whom, besides Bekauri, were academicians Ipatiev, Professor Kovalevsky, and Professor Tikhvinsky, in 1920 became the X-Money Experimental Workshop for Inventions. Some scoffed that X-Money's main invention was breaking into safes and expropriating funds. They say that the Bolshevik Soviet communists needed funds and obtained them in the usual way, by robbery. Perhaps this was the case, but the workshop's activities did not end there. In 1921 alone, the Bolsheviks allocated 10 million rubles for inventions. Bekauri became the head of the workshop and demonstrated the first results of his work within a few months. He presented a safe with an electric alarm system, an experimental device for remote control, and drawings of a guided torpedo to the Labor and Defense Council of the Republic. At the same time, Bekauri presented these prospects of army robotization to the Soviet leadership. The country was surrounded by interventionists, as the Soviets always claimed, even when I was a teenager in the USSR. Same claims. And a number of people wanted to escape it, as the reality demonstrated throughout the history of the Soviet Union. People did not want to live in that utopia. So the problem of border security was acute. Therefore, Bekauri's message about this prospect of waging war from a distance was inspiring. And the scientist himself colorfully described how inexpensive radio-controlled boats filled with explosives can sink British destroyers and battleships, and how radio-controlled submarines can be used to scout and shoot enemy personnel using armored tankettes. The report was enthusiastically received. Actually, the ideas were already up in the air. Quite a lot of people concerned knew about Professor Pirchikov's successful experiments in radio control. This person was assassinated before the communist takeover, in the days of the empire. It was a very strange case, and you can find my video about Pirchikov. Just see the URL in the description to this video here. Similar developments were carried out in Germany, but the Germans controlled the boats to a thin, long wire. And this was the weakness of the method. Therefore, in July 1921, in an atmosphere of secrecy, the OST Bureau was created with a staff of 77 people, whose main task was to develop new weapons. In the very first year, 25 million rubles were allocated for development, a huge amount at that time. The Bureau consisted of 6 departments: special aviation, electrical engineering, explosives, scuba diving, and experimental research. For several years, OST Bureau managed the torpedo mine plant or factory. It was staffed by design engineer Alexei Asafov, engineer Pyotr Bekhterev, inventors Grachovsky, Dunda, and other talented scientists. Bekauri and his colleagues worked with their sleeves rolled up. By 1924, Bekauri and his engineer Vladimir Mitkevich had developed Pygmy devices for radio-controlled bombs. In 1929, they were put into service. the Pygmy remote control landmines and the improved F-1 prototype developed just before the war managed to be put into fighting and very effective. By the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, as the World War II is called in Russia, and during the war years, Soviet special purpose engineering units were armed with tactical and strategic landmines, with complex radio engineering devices much more advanced than their predecessors. Individuals, companies, and platoons began to widely use devices for explosions at a distance from the very first days of the war. The improvement of the Pygmy devices continued during the war years. So in 1942, a device for radio control of the explosion of landmines and mines of the FTDK type, developed by a group of specialists in the electrical engineering and shipbuilding industries, was adopted by the Red Army and mass-produced. OST Bureau had developed the first robotic teletank in the USSR. The experiments were conducted on the basis of the Soviet model of the Renault FT tank, on which scientists installed remote control equipment. The T-18 was first tested in 1930, and 7 models of the new TT-18 guided tank were produced in 1933. It lacked control levers, and there was a robotic system in the driver's seat that could execute 16 commands. At a kilometer away, the tank could stop, turn off engine, start it, start up, dive, and lift explosives on board. However, it did not go into the serial production on the ground that it kept deviating from the straight line. It had to adjust the course. Nevertheless, those teletanks were already used in the Soviet-Finnish War of 1939, and by the beginning of World War II, the Red Army had 2 battalions of teletanks. Apparently, later models, such as T-26 or Tu-26, were also in service. They had on board a DT machine gun and 45mm cannon, a flamethrower, and could deliver 700 kilograms of explosives to the enemy's defense line or create a smoke screen. Information about radio-controlled torpedoes Akula-1 and Akula-2 created in the OST Bureau, as I said, is still classified, top secret. It is known that Bekauri successfully tested them at the Petrozavodsk Bay, after which the torpedoes were to be handed over to the army for testing. A radio-controlled super-heavy bomber capable of delivering explosives to other continents was being developed. In light of this, we can take a fresh look at the intercontinental flights of the famous Soviet pilot Valery Chkalov. The first developments of the USSR in the fields of UAVs, drones, date back to the 1930s, where there was an aviation boom in the country. Aircraft of various scales and purposes were developed by both design organizations and private enthusiasts. Even then, there were attempts to create attack drones called aerial torpedoes, which were planned to attack targets tightly covered by enemy anti-aircraft artillery. Work on the creation of such weapons was carried out on the initiative of Mikhail Tukhachevsky by the engineers of the Special Technical Bureau, OST Bureau, under the Supreme Economic Council of the Russian Soviet Federal Socialist Republic, led by Vladimir Bekauri. In the first half of the 1930s, the OST Bureau was transferred to Moscow and soon became a prison for scientists, slaves who had scientific education and drive. In total, 11 military inventions were created and adopted with the participation of Bekauri, and 20 more technical innovations were under development. The most important of them was the self-propelled automatic mines ahead of time, torpedo anchor mines, and missile barrage mines, all of which were developed in the USSR in the 1930s. But Stalin's machine of repression did not spare the ingenious inventor. Since, by the nature of his service, Bekauri had to constantly purchase missing equipment, boats and radio components from the Germans and the Swedes, in 1937 he was accused of espionage in favor of Germany, as well as embezzlement of funds and sabotage. Allegedly, he simply squandered all the funds allocated for inventions. In fact, he invested all the money he earned in that bureau. The NKVD's interrogation methods were such that the 55-year-old inventor signed everything they wanted from him and confessed to everything. He was executed. He was shot on February 8, 1938. And he was rehabilitated only 18 years later, meaning his name was cleared from the accusations from the secret police. Without Bekauri, the OST Bureau was transferred to the People's Commissariat of Defense Industry and reorganized into a special technical directorate. Many developments of the brilliant inventor and organizer were forever never implemented. This is what I wanted to let you know today about this very interesting inventor. And maybe it's good that most of his ideas were not implemented. Because you see, Russia for centuries has had many bright people, but those in power usually misused such inventions. I will bring you more stories about brilliant inventions, some of them forgotten, some of them never put in practice, some of them stolen by foreign powers. I'll keep telling you more such stories. And if you like my research, please support me through the links you will find in description to this video. Please sign up for my channel and hit the notification button. And thank you for your attention to my work.